During the Protestant Reformation, few arguments were as explosive as the ones about the Catholic Mass. Today, we're going to go straight to the source and break down one of the most pivotal critiques from John Calvin's really influential work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion.
Whoa! Okay, so Calvin does not mince words here. He's not framing the Mass as some simple error or a misunderstanding. No, in his view, this was a deliberate act designed to completely annihilate the meaning of the Lord's Supper.
So, to build his case, Calvin structures his whole argument around four central charges. He believes these points prove that the Mass fundamentally undermines the absolute core tenets of Christianity.
And here they are. These are basically the four pillars of his entire critique. He believes the Mass inflicts dishonor, buries the cross, erases Christ's death, and ultimately just destroys the sacrament. So let's walk through them one by one.
Okay, let's get into his first major theological point. It all really begins with the concept of priesthood and the nature of sacrifice, which, Calvin saw as being completely redefined by the Mass.
So Calvin argues that back in the Old Testament, priests were mortal, right? They died. They needed successors to take their place. Christ, however, is presented in Scripture as an eternal priest. So Calvin contends that the act of appointing priests to perform the sacrifice of the Mass makes it seem like Christ needs a substitute, a vicar, which to him dishonors his unique and unending role.
And this same exact logic applies to the act of sacrifice itself. For Calvin, the constant repetition of Old Testament sacrifices was proof that they were insufficient. So, he argues, if Christ's sacrifice on the cross was perfect and final, any attempt to repeat it, which is how he saw the daily Mass, implies that the original act was somehow incomplete.
And he grounds this argument firmly in Scripture, citing passages just like this one from the book of Hebrews. The key takeaway for him is the singular nature of the act, one offering perfected for all time. In his view, the Bible itself is declaring the sacrifice a finished, unrepeatable event.
Now this leads to what might be Calvin's most crucial distinction, the very purpose of the Holy Meal itself. He saw this irreconcilable difference between receiving a gift and paying for favor.
He framed it kind of like this. The Lord's Supper is a gift from God. It's meant to be received with thanksgiving as a memorial of something that's already finished. The Mass, in his analysis, transforms this into a work performed by humans, an offering, or a price paid to God in order to gain favor and merit.
And for Calvin, this was not a minor distinction. He saw it as a complete reversal of the divine order. It's as profound a difference as that between giving and receiving. This concept is right at the very heart of his theological objection.
So, to support his case, Calvin actually redefines Christian sacrifice itself. He argues there are two distinct types and that the Mass confuses them.
The first is the sacrifice of expiation. Now, this is the act of atonement, the one meant to satisfy divine justice and wash away sin. Calvin argues this was accomplished once and for all by Christ on the cross, and by him alone, period.
The second kind is the sacrifice of thanksgiving. This isn't about atoning for sin, but about responding to God's grace through praise, prayer, and acts of love and charity. This, he claims, is the only kind of sacrifice the Church is called to offer.
So, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, for Calvin, true Christian sacrifice isn't some ritual performed by a priest at an altar. It's the daily actions of every single believer, a life of gratitude and service offered to God.
This entire line of reasoning, about priesthood, sacrifice, and worship, it all builds to his final and decisive conclusion about the proper rituals or sacraments of the Church.
His logic is pretty straightforward. He argues that for something to be a sacrament, it has to be attached to a specific promise from God. And since humans can't just, invent promises from God, he concludes they can't invent sacraments either.
So based on his interpretation of the Bible, he finds evidence for exactly two such divinely instituted rituals. Baptism, as the one-time entry into the Church, and the Lord's Supper as the continual spiritual food for believers. And that's it. He asserts the Church has no authority to add anything else to the list.
And that brings us to our final thought. Calvin's intense focus on the Mass wasn't just about one ceremony. His argument really demonstrates how changing the definition and purpose of a single central ritual can have these huge cascading consequences, ultimately reshaping an entire system of faith and worship. Pretty amazing to think about.